There have been few WWE stars who have transitioned to MMA, but there is only one that can be described as an embarrassing failure. The story of CM Punk's journey from the WWE all the way to the brightest lights of the UFC Octagon is a tale of desperation.
This isn't story time with mum and dad, you know, this is the real thing.
Delusion.
Think you can win it?
Hands getting raised.
He's a dog, man.
He does not have athletic talent.
It was kind of late in the game, I think, for him to make that transition.
Dude, CM Punk is it's horrible for the sport, as far as I'm concerned.
There's no way. There's nothing there.
But also heart.
Oh, you guys are all gonna make me cry. She just said she was proud of me. You know?
Sit back as we unravel this story of the worst UFC record of all time. It's 2014 and the UFC is dying. The meteoric numbers that symbolized exponential growth in a post-Ultimate Fighter world in 2009 have dwindled. The superstars who upheld massive pay-per-view numbers like Brock Lesnar have now left the sport.
I'm a white boy and I'm jacked. Deal with it.
You're just so big, and you come out of
Anderson Silva's leg is split in two, John Jones's domination is getting old, and George St. Pierre has been hit so many times in the head that he has left his championship behind in search for aliens.
All of us were like...
The average buy rate for the calendar year of 2014 is at a decade low. 10 years of marketing and grafting by Dana White & Co. has all started to unravel. There is just no one on the roster who is putting eyes on screens and bums in seats, even after bringing in a women's division, something he said he would never do.
When are we going to see women in the UFC, man?
Never. I'm going to make it official right now. Ronda Rousey.
Ronda's star power is really yet to take effect. For the first time in a generation, rival organizations are doing more numbers than the supposed premier organization on planet Earth. Things are not looking good. The UFC gravely needs a new star. They need to recreate the numbers that Brock Lesnar produced. They are in desperation mode.
I want to oil you up.
And so naturally, this all leads to one man, a WWE star looking for a real fist fight. The stars have aligned.
Oh my gosh! He might make his opponent tap right here!
My first memories of the WWE are probably of being 10 years old playing SmackDown vs Raw 2006. And so naturally, I was led to believe that in order to be a wrestler, you needed some kind of gimmick, the gobbledygooker, the Shockmaster,
Come on, you want a piece of me?
Goldust.
revel in it.
But CM Punk was none of these things.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm joined at this time by the Steel Domain Television Champion, the incomparable CM Punk.
As a late teen, Punk worked in a comic book shop before getting grandiose ideas of becoming a wrestling superstar, starting out in backyard promotions that really meant he was wrestling in the worst safety conditions and putting his body on the line in front of a crowd of mildly entertained alcoholics. Punk would go on to quite literally put himself through hell for the sake of entertainment, his body scarred and weathered by the physical punishment that wrestling seemingly does not get enough credit for. Punk found himself shining on the mic though. He was a gifted entertainer, and some of the bigger wrestling organizations took notice as he bounced around the country growing his brand. Relatively quickly for wrestling, just under 10 years, Punk found himself being signed with the biggest wrestling federation in the world, the WWE. CM Punk wasn't gifted athletically, not like those ludicrously jacked men on the posters of the Royal Rumble, who were definitely not on steroids. He wasn't painted gold or wore a chicken costume. Instead, CM Punk was just your average looking guy, and that's how he got by. CM Punk's gimmick as a WWE star was built on authenticity, you could say, a stark contrast to the larger-than-life caricatures that dominated the era. His only gimmick was that he was straight edge.
I don't drink, and I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. My addiction is wrestling.
I'm not even sure if that counts as a gimmick, but here we are. But it goes much deeper than that. Growing up in Chicago, Punk witnessed the slow erosion of his family as his dad struggled with the bottle. His father was often abusive mentally, and as the head of the family, completely failed it, drinking away his years, leaving Punk to pick up the pieces of a broken family as a teenager. He embraced straight edge as a deliberate rejection of his father and the chaos that he had seen firsthand. Punk played this persona as a heel. He formed the Straight Edge Society, as it was called, a cult-like faction that saved wrestlers by force. His promos cut deep, raw and personal, blurring lines between that character of CM Punk and the lost kid from his childhood. In a way, it kind of felt dangerously real, and that resonated with people. Punk's popularity increased, and he would go on to capture every title available to him, eventually transitioning to the Raw and SmackDown brand. But true ascension came in 2011, with the Summer of Punk as it became to be known, his contract nearing expiration. He delivered the now legendary pipe bomb monologue, a scathing, unscripted sounding rant against WWE's management after being cut off live on air, presumably because he took the speech too far. CM Punk exploded in popularity. After defeating John Cena in a match that felt revolutionary, he would go on to reign as champ for 434 days. That's the longest modern reign at the time. But even though Punk got exactly what he wanted, the next couple years of being in the limelight were a bit of a slog for him. Punk felt burned out from the grueling schedule. Through 2013, the frustration continued to mount. No WrestleMania main event, despite his unprecedented reign. And so, his final WWE match came at the beginning of 2014 at the Royal Rumble, where he was eliminated early in the night. The next day, Punk informed Vince McMahon and Triple H that he was leaving wrestling forever. He was exhausted. He walked out and went home. He was done. On June 13th, 2014, the day that he would marry the love of his life and fellow wrestling icon AJ Lee, the WWE would fire CM Punk permanently from the company. If you thought that the UFC had some shady business practices, then the WWE was operating on a whole other level. Vince McMahon would later come out and apologize, claiming that he had no idea that he was actually getting married on that day and that some wires got crossed. But if you ask me, that's just utter trash, and if you were CM Punk, you'd feel pretty vindicated in your choice to walk from the organization in the first place. Petty just doesn't even do justice to how low that was. It would take until November of that year for Punk to actually detail his side of the whole story. He did this on Colt Cabana's podcast, and the gossip was pretty juicy.
And I thought this thing that I loved, that I thought I loved, it just made me so miserable. All the time, it made me miserable. I was disgruntled with my storylines. I was banged up. I was mad that I wasn't the main event of WrestleMania.
Poor medical care, unpaid royalties, feeling undervalued, underpaid, worked to the bone, and burnt out. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about how Punk felt. Even after getting paid millions, he still felt slighted. And fair enough, Punk's retirement from professional wrestling was set in stone from this point. The question was, what was the next frontier for this straight-edge pioneer to conquer next?
Hey UFC fans, this is CM Punk, and I will see you in the Octagon in 2015. Is this a one-time adventure, or are you considering this as your new career?
This is my new career, and when it's all said and done, when I'm finished, everybody's going to have to respect me because I have come here to fight.
In a move that I doubt very many people would have seen coming, CM Punk was ushered cage-side to announce that he would be entering the UFC. They did this on the broadcast of one of the most hyped cards of the year. Johnny Hendricks and Robbie Lawler were rematching in the main event after their Fight of the Year contender title fight earlier that year, which this time round could hopefully resolve many of the question marks lingering from their first outing. And in the co-main event, Anthony Pettis, who that week had been revealed to be featuring on the front cover of Wheatie Boxes going forward, would be taking on Gilbert Melendez, a legend of Strikeforce who was looking to grab the UFC belt for his championship trinket collection. The undercard was also filled with some incredible names: Uriah Faber, Tony Ferguson, and Brandon Sharp.
Dicey.
All things considered, it was a decent pay-per-view, eclipsing some of the shit that the UFC has been putting on recently. And still, as a sign of the times in 2014, this pay-per-view only sold 400,000 buys, the second highest of that year. Things weren't looking great for the UFC, and so as we discussed in the intro, here CM Punk was, trying to inject some much-needed hype into the organization. They would end the interview on the outside of the chain-linked fence, with Joe wishing CM Punk good luck. Phil would respond by saying that luck is for losers, which, you know, I guess is a great mentality for the game that he was about to step into. But Joe would rather sarcastically cap this segment off with what we were all thinking at the time. I would take as much luck as I could get, he said, whilst smirking menacingly at the camera. He knew what we all knew, The path ahead was almost impossible, especially considering that Punk hadn't even walked into an MMA gym at this point, stating in that very interview that he did have a background in Kenpo and had done some jiu-jitsu on and off, which means absolutely nothing. He didn't even have a stripe on his white belt, as we would find out. Yet still, Phil was planning to fight and win inside of not any old cage within a year, but the UFC Octagon, the most prestigious arena in the world. And you know, I gotta say that's almost as impossible as a guy below 5'5" getting an attractive girlfriend. But in his very next interview backstage, he would be standing next to Megan O'Leary, who was married to Joseph Benavidez. So what I'm saying is, I guess there's a chance.
I used to guys like you in high school.
CM Punk's a guy who recently signed with the UFC. Now, he doesn't have a wrestling pedigree, he's got more of a pro wrestling pedigree.
Do you think he could actually, get to a level of a UFC fighter in a few months to fight in the organization?
WWE, I mean, no, you're an idiot. You're gonna get hurt. You deserve to get hurt for thinking that way.
This isn't story time with mum and dad, this is the real thing, and he's going to learn pretty hard and pretty fast that this was a gigantic mistake on his behalf.
Does he deserve to be in the UFC at this moment? Not from his credentials, no.
The following month, in January of 2015, Punk announced that he would be training with Duke Roufus at Roufusport in Milwaukee. Duke Roufus was one of the most influential and legendary striking coaches in MMA history, a title not so easily earned. A multi-time world kickboxing champion in his own right during the 1990s, he transitioned into coaching after retiring, founding Roufusport MMA Academy in Milwaukee, which became a powerhouse gym producing elite talent. Duke was regarded as one of the top striking trainers outside of Thailand. Roufus, in his time as a coach, had mentored multiple world champions, including former UFC lightweight champion Anthony Pettis, whom he coached from a young age, with Pettis considering Duke a father figure. Then there is former UFC welterweight champion Tyron Woodley, former Bellator and ONE welterweight champion Ben Askren, former UFC welterweight champion Bilal Muhammad, and finally, grooming world champion Pat Berry. If there was a place to call home, and a place that could get you ready to win a fight in the UFC, then it was Roufusport. After a test weight cut, it was announced that Punk would be competing in the welterweight division. By the time Easter had come and gone, Punk had put in a few months of hard training. He finally felt that it was time to meet with the UFC in July to discuss plans for his debut. The month came and went, and there was still no announcement. People had grown skeptical of anything actually transpiring in 2015, and people's fears were quickly validated. Because in October of 2015, Duke Roufus would announce that CM Punk had injured his shoulder, requiring surgery. And so it was. CM Punk's expected year-long escapade into MMA was about to be extended far into 2016. After rehabbing his shoulder for a couple of months, the search for his first opponent inside of the cage had officially begun, and the UFC, never one to miss an opportunity, would weave the Punk narrative into one of their newly airing reality shows. And that was Looking for a Fight, a show in which Dana and his pals go all over the country scouting for new talent to join the UFC. This was interspersed with the guys goofing around. It was essentially just a show with a huge budget that I feel was specifically made just so that Dana could go on holiday with his pals. It was a blast to see Dana just hanging out and having fun with two of the more funnier personalities from the UFC company. The fact that these episodes were placed on YouTube for free was just the icing on the cake, really. In the second episode ever released, the UFC would find their man. But even at 0-0, or 1-0 I guess now, there are still levels to this game. Mickey Gall wasn't the Daniel Lambert of MMA that Bautista fought in his debut, or the Japanese punching bag that Brock Lesnar ripped to the ground. No, Mickey Gall had years of MMA experience under his belt. After starting boxing at the age of 13, and just 3 years after that, he would turn into a devout student of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. By the time he had finished high school, he had been the captain of the wrestling team and the football team. So whilst Punk was dancing amidst the dust and muck of backyards, hurtling through tables as a comic book shop nerd in his late teens, Mickey at that same life period was the exact opposite. He was literally a high school jock bully, not only an athlete, but gifted too. At every belt level, on his way to brown belt, he had won multiple national tournaments. So whilst Punk at the age of 37 was learning how to throw a jab, Mickey had been doing it for 11 years. The gap in skill and training was so vast, it was almost laughable, bearing in mind that by the time Dana is sitting down and watching this guy, Mickey is still yet to have actually competed in the sport of MMA as a professional. That's just how ridiculous the time, dedication and talent level that is required to compete in this sport. The funniest thing about this story was that Dana wasn't even exactly sold that he had found the right opponent for Punk. You know, submitting someone in the very first round of your MMA debut just isn't good enough when it comes to earning that coveted spot across the cage from Punk. So the UFC signed Mickey, but he had to prove himself under the brightest lights in order to secure the fight. And so just a month after the airing of Looking for a Fight, Mickey would be fighting again, this time in the Octagon. So the question became, who would Mickey have to sharpen his blade against? Well, it was a photographer. I wish I could say I was joking.
Got your ass.
Mickey Gall was matched up against Mike Jackson, a friend of Mick Maynard, the UFC matchmaker. Mike was a photographer for a minor organization called Legacy FC, which Mick had been the president of. The UFC had stooped so low that they couldn't even find a UFC photographer for Gall to fight. Instead, we were left with Mike Jackson riding an 0-0 record, and whilst the UFC had claimed that he did have experience on the amateur scene, they failed to mention that that experience was actually just a loss. Mike had also been an amateur Golden Gloves boxer. It was kind of bizarre to watch, really. The matchup made little sense. I assume that it had actually been years since we had seen an 0-0 fighter in the UFC, yet here Mike was allowed to walk to the Octagon, having never thrown a punch as a professional.
Already, he's on his bicycle. Wants to be a moving target because he knows that it's an eventuality that Mickey Gall is going to shoot for a takedown. Big question is, how does Mickey deal with the added pressure?
Early knockdown for Mickey Gall. Not quite under the chin. He is there. Mickey Gall makes good on the UFC debut. Submits Mike.
In a shock to absolutely no one though, Mike would be knocked down and choked out in just 45 seconds, all while CM Punk, who was watching in attendance, stood there and just looked like a deer in headlights. It was the look of a man having the full weight of a frightening reality fall upon him. If it wasn't obvious, the UFC had set him up with a straight killer. In all honesty, it would have made far more sense if the loser of this fight was the one that should have been facing Punk. Mickey would seize the opportunity and jump on the microphone once again, claiming that he was hungry and wanted to be fed CM Punk. They would quickly be faced off against one another in the Octagon, with a bout between the pair promised to come shortly. But while standing in the center of the Octagon, hyping up one of the most promoted fights in recent memory, Punk had failed to mention that he actually required surgery and would once again be out of action. Those more conspiratorial-minded would suggest that perhaps Punk, who had been slated to fight as soon as the approaching UFC 200, a fight card more bloated than Brock Lesnar's intestines, had shite himself on the bus after watching Mickey perform and realized that he didn't need more time to prepare, probably try and get another stripe on his white belt, I don't know. I remember stumbling into the sport at UFC 200 and thinking, damn, this is epic. My journey after this point in understanding the sport quickly fell down the path of watching meme videos by Mipe Sports and highlight reel knockouts from the likes of Mohawk Man and Horse Meat Dude. Little did I know that in my entire first month or so of watching this sport, I was in fact missing one of the most anticipated freak show fights in an eon. Because whilst many had thought that the injury would have put Punk out for well over a year, it was instead in June, the month before UFC 200, that he announced to the world that he would be taking on Mickey at UFC 203, just 7 months after his back surgery.
I will be debuting September 10th in Cleveland.
Oh, this is exciting. September 10th,
awesome.
Cleveland.
Summer came and went, and I eagerly sat at my computer screen, watching as the events came and went. Vets of this sport, fatigued by the UFC putting on boring events, were totally lost on me. I lapped up McDonald vs Lineker and Rodriguez vs Caceres like it was a fine wine. Hell, my very first pay-per-view event as a certified fan after UFC 200 was naturally UFC 201, and I remember Lawler getting knocked out cold and thinking to myself, I bet this guy sucks. How wrong was I? Then came UFC 202, McGregor vs Diaz 2. What a beautiful time to be a fan it was. Anyway, it's August 2016 now, so let's lock in, because the greatest TV show in my little prepubescent MMA mind was about to air. A cinematic masterpiece was about to grace the gooey bits behind my eyelids. I am of course talking about the evolution of CM Punk. For what it's worth, I thought that the show was rather good. For me, at the very least, I got an insight into the world of MMA in a way that I feel is quite unique for a new fan. I got to see through the lens of someone experiencing the same emotions as me. See, Punk was walking into a world that he didn't quite understand either.
Take your time. Oh, don't open yourself up though, remember?
And so over the course of the show,
good, start a little closer to me, champ.
I feel like I grew alongside him in my understanding of this sport. Throughout the show, there were some raw and emotional moments in the episodes, and it really did bring you closer to understanding Punk's intentions and his heart.
Yes, I'm doing this for me, absolutely, 100%, all the way. But if I inspire one person to do something that somebody told them that they can't do, then we've all done our jobs.
The dude was extremely genuine, and it was hard not to like him.
That's why I don't discourage anybody. If you love it and it's something that you want to do, you have to do it.
The funniest part I thought though in the show was when they showed him doing a mimic run-through of a professional MMA fight in his gym, with walkouts and a crowd and music and everything, a full-on amateur bout if you will, and the whole time, the production team of the show had to edit it and talk like Punk didn't get submitted like 9 times in one fight, which I promise won't be foreshadowing for anything in the future. In summary though, the whole 4-part series, whilst masterfully executed, can only be described as a 1-hour-long MK Ultra psyop edited together in order to brainwash us into thinking that CM Punk genuinely stood a chance in the cage. For me, the fresh-faced MMA virgin, well, I was completely gaslit into thinking that CM Punk was actually going to win, and, well, fight week had finally arrived, so I guess we were about to find out?
I could see the cracks form in the paint, growing like a fire, what do I say? Can you see them? Can you see them? Choking on the words, choke on your name, choke back on the doubts I hold at bay. Can you feel it? Can you feel it?
Cleveland this weekend, CM Punk makes his UFC debut as he moves over from the WWE, and he joins us.
Are you concerned about his jiu-jitsu experience being more than yours, CM?
No.
Dude, CM Punk is it's horrible for the sport, as far as I'm concerned.
I will accept criticism levied towards me from anybody that's stepped into the Octagon, but
The respect that this guy has earned from his team, he's a dog, man.
CM, what has this transition been like?
It's been fun, and you know, I get to sleep in my bed every night. No matter how hard training was, I get to go home and kiss my wife. Like, that's a luxury in my world. I never used to get to do that.
You think you can win it?
Hands getting raised, 100%, no doubt in my mind.
This is my goal, is my dream. I want to be a champion.
I've always performed way better in high pressure situations, especially when I had people saying that I couldn't do it.
Brighter than your heart like a ghost.
His Octagon debut. Standing 6 feet 1 inch tall, weighing in at 170 pounds. Finally, out of Chicago, Illinois, presenting CM Punk. And the afternoon is our referee in charge. Here we go.
Mickey Gall shoots a double immediately and has CM Punk on his back. Not impressive, but he's going to do it again. I think that's it.
It is all over. Mickey Gall submits CM Punk. Just like that.
Really hard on myself. I lost, and it sucks. And it was lopsided, and it's upsetting, but, I know I'm better than that.
Punk to your left. I am curious, your wife was, very, cautious about, watching you train, being here tonight. What did you say to her? What did she say to you after the fight?
Oh, you guys are all gonna make me cry. You bastards. She just said she was proud of me,
I think there's still money to be made on him. He's still a big superstar. So I think he will have another UFC fight.
Yeah, he trained for almost 2 years, and he came in here and he did it, you know.
The cage door closed, and the illusion that the UFC had crafted over the last 2 years since signing Punk had shattered in almost an instant. All that media marketing that no doubt would have cost tens of thousands, designed to specifically hype up Punk's MMA debut, was made meaningless in moments. Punk charged forward, reminiscent of his training MMA fight in the first episode of The Evolution of Punk. He uncorked a ungodly straight, and then that was all she wrote. The Octagon canvas quickly became a graveyard for Punk's rather ludicrous MMA dreams. At 2 minutes and 14 seconds of the very first round, it was all over. Years worth of preparation evaporated, leaving just the agony of a sour reality. I guess it's true, the Octagon doesn't bend to stories like the WWE. Here on the other side of the cage, only truth can be found. Punk rose from the canvas, bloodied yet composed, his face etched with the exhaustion of a dream shattered on the canvas. In the post-fight interview, his voice remained steady though, laced with that familiar gravel.
Yeah, you know, in life, you go big or you go home. I just like to take challenges. This was a hell of a mountain to try to climb, and I didn't get to the summit today, but that doesn't mean I'm going to give up. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop.
Unlike what can be said for many fighters who falter in defeat, there were no alibis, no finger-pointing, at the years of preparation that had crumbled in under 3 minutes. Just a stoic acknowledgement that this was the gamble that he had made, and it simply had not paid off. But the world, ever merciless in its judgment, offered no such grace. The backlash was biblical, memes, gifs, and a cacophony of critics all chirping up. Men who had, rather ironically, never danced in the blood game themselves had a lot of words to say. The internet was awash with venomous glee, branding him a wrestling fraud and an overhyped fake. The fact was, it was super easy for the internet to paint this as a vanity project for the UFC that had sullied the sport's integrity. Forums buzzed with the dissections of his technique, or should I say lack thereof, his telegraphed desperation, and a less than desirable ground game had all exposed a chasm between that scripted spectacle that he had come from and the honest and gritty world that Mickey Gall had been molded by as a 13-year-old. Punk's defeat to Mickey Gall in his botched MMA debut left a lot to be desired, to say the least. Yet it was not lost on me that in defeat, Punk was so unbelievably humble. His post-fight speech, for what it's worth, was actually quite something. What would be usually met with cringiness by me made way for inspiration. The fact is, he had been here before. Whilst professional fighters might balk at the idea that Punk had encountered this scenario previously, those less precious could admit that there is a striking parallel to Punk lamenting how his ear being half ripped off at the end of a bloody and destructive wrestling match in some guy's backyard, and to now standing in defeat, quite literally with his ear ripped off again in the center of the octagon. Defeat, pain, and heart are all found in many places, and only a man exposed to it so numerously can know how to deal with it so admirably. Punk was that guy, scarred, weathered, heartbroken, and humiliated many times. This was nothing new. All that can be said was that he tried, and that's all that we can ever do. Now at the age of 37, his stepping stone out of the WWE and into another paycheck had turned into a stumbling block. The question gnawing at him, no doubt, would be, what was next? He had burned his bridge to go back to wrestling, and here he was, miserably embarrassed on the biggest platform MMA could ever provide. Father Time had no doubt stripped Punk of options, and so would he push ever deeper into the fray or surrender to inevitability? For most in the immediate aftermath of a loss, the thought of entering another training camp is just too much to consider. Chad Mendes, after being bludgeoned half to death by Jose Aldo, said that he would lie awake in bed at night, reliving the loss on repeat, staring at his bedroom fan. The last thing on his mind was what time wrestling practice was, let alone stepping into the cage again. Love him or hate him, CM Punk's heart and determination was on display instantly. On the car ride home the very next morning, he was on the phone to Dana White, discussing his plans for his next fight, and that was with or without the UFC. He simply didn't care if he was going to get a big paycheck or not. All he wanted was to actually prove himself. That's courage most men fall short of every single day. Not many can get embarrassed in a spectacle, and to the scale that Punk had, and then want to do it all over again. He needed to, without a single doubt, get back into the gym and really learn the game if he truly wanted to come back and actually win a professional MMA bout. Seasons came and went, the wind whistled through the Wisconsin sugar maples, and sweat dripped from the brow of a man pining for victory inside the bowels of Roufusport. It had been well over a year since Punk's less than desirable debut in the sport, and finally, after what Punk felt like was an adequate time in the hyperbolic time chamber, was ready to do it all over again. In April of 2018, the next opponent for CM Punk was revealed, and it was the fight that should have been made in the first place. Phil would be taking on full-time photographer and part-time delusional fighter Mike Jackson in a fight for the Make-A-Wish MMA World Championship. The pair would square off as the opener of the main card of UFC 225.
I am nervous, I am anxious, but there's also this feeling of whether they boo or whether they cheer me, this is where I live now. This is my headspace.
What drove you to do it again? I mean, was there any part of you that said, hey, I did it? You know what I mean? I accomplished the goal. It didn't work out, but I did it, and I'm done.
I just think it was never about, oh, I just want to try it, the one time. I think it was about, if I'm going to try it, I'm going to try it. And that means you deal with the losses and you deal with the bad days as well as the good.
After 3 rounds, we go to the judges' scorecards for decision. All 3 judges scored this contest 30-26 for the winner by unanimous decision, Mike the Truth Jackson.
I'm here with the winner, Mike Jackson, also the first guy to ever take a...
Mike Jackson, in one of the most bizarre and surreal fights in a long time, did outwork, out-wrestle and outstrike CM Punk on paper, but the reality inside of the cage could only be described as an embarrassment. Jackson looked like he had just got out of bed and was mildly confused to find himself in the guard of Punk, looking around cageside for an explanation from his coaches as to why he was in a sanctioned MMA fight on the main card of UFC 225. The performance rattled Dana White, who in the post-fight press conference tore the now 1-1 fighter to shreds.
Michael Jackson, I'm not happy with. This guy was acting like a goofball tonight. You get this opportunity to come in and fight CM Punk, and you're doing like bolo punches to the body on top. Never looked like he was trying to finish the fight ever, right? Looked like he could have finished the fight a few times. Never tried. I don't know what that guy did for a living before we gave him the shot, but whatever it was, he needs to go back and do that again.
It was rather unfortunate for Punk, who this time did actually put on a far better performance, but had to be subject to one of the most bizarre performances of all time. A couple of media members actually scored the first round for Punk as well, who managed to score a takedown and stun Jackson a few times with his hands. The second round would ultimately be scored a 10-8 for Jackson, even though he spent the whole time looking around like he couldn't even be bothered about the whole charade. The reality is, Punk never stood a chance, and if anything, he was set up to fail. No one deserves to be dragged in front of the entire world in your first attempt at anything, and the whole thing was made even more ludicrous by the fact that the UFC had legitimately pretended that this farce was not only feasible, but an extremely serious affair. The 4-part documentary, the main card placements, the interviews, the media scrums, everything, and at every single point, they acted like the 37-year-old man was somehow going to pull this off. The sad fact is that CM Punk's whole MMA career would have been far more sympathetic if it had turned out that this was some Shutter Island experiment where we all had to act like CM Punk was a legit MMA fighter so that he could tackle his repressed childhood trauma of his alcoholic and abusive father.
The guy's 39 years old. I love the guy. He's the nicest guy in the world. We gave him 2 shots, and he had a lot of heart tonight in this fight, and yeah, I think you should call it a wrap.
He's a very nice guy. He's a very nice guy, and he's a hard worker, but he does not have athletic talent.
It was kind of late in the game, I think, for him to make that transition.
I mean, I watched him hit the pads, and I'm like, there's no way.
Oh, yeah.
There's no way. There's nothing there.
Yeah, there is no, I'm going to do this with all my heart.
Punk was never accepted by fans, and was never accepted by fighters either, who felt that he hadn't earned his spot as one of the highest paid MMA athletes of all time. Punk left the Octagon with a 2nd loss on his record, but his statement after the loss read, "You only live once, and I'm alive." Whilst the UFC did discuss the fact that Punk may not remain in the organization, they never in fact actually released him, and for the few years after this 2018 bout, Punk remained in the USADA testing pool, indicating that he may in fact have a third bout in the organization, but ultimately, it never came. By 2021, and at the age of 42, Punk retired as a professional from MMA, having never won a fight. When the dust had finally settled on what would be the rather unfortunate career of CM Punk, there remained the nagging sense that Punk had been somewhat neglected in his stint in the premier organization on planet Earth. He was undoubtedly an experiment, milked more than Chris Evans in spandex. Phil Brooks was clearly taken advantage of, despite Dana White claiming that they were friends.
Well, I don't know if it was an experiment. You know, I became friends with him. He's a nice guy. I like him. I have a lot of respect for him. He wanted to give it a shot. I gave him a shot.
But this story must come full circle in order for it to be explained. See, when I opened this video, I painted the picture of a very different time from the one that those like me had trudged into back in 2016. We entered what would be the absolute peak of this sport as it currently stands, the intersection of Conor McGregor's and Ronda Rousey's meteoric rise. But when Punk was announced as a member of the company's roster, McGregor was simply a hammer fist in Dustin Poirier's pea-head, and Rousey had yet to find virality. 2014, as we know, was a decade low point. They desperately needed something lest they fall to an up-and-rising organization who was building an impressive roster of their own, pulling in millions of viewership, and so for the first time since their monopoly had started, the UFC were under threat. Punk making his intentions to start an MMA career post his WWE one was clearly the time that he would have been negotiating with organizations for a contract. The fact is, if Brock was anything to go by, Punk's pay-per-view draw was destined to be greatness if he could walk into the cage and put on a performance. For what it's worth, without having even seen him throw a punch, these companies, the UFC, Bellator 1 and the World Series of Fighting, would have all known that they needed him on his roster. And now we have some vital context. A couple of years ago, a few fighters started an antitrust lawsuit against the UFC, which would ultimately dig up some texts that more than showed the temperature of the room in the UFC head offices during this time period. Lorenzo Fertitta, in a text message exchange with Dana White, would state that they had sacrificed too much and that they needed to suck the oxygen out of the room, presumably so that these other companies hanging onto the UFC's coattails would suffocate and die. CM Punk was integral to this war, and so for the first time since James Toney bumbled his way into the 8-sided cage, the UFC decided that they would rather suffer embarrassment than to see another company profit from Punk's name value, and so the UFC signed him and took the opportunity from every other organization interested. With this context, the fights that the UFC set up for Punk begin to make a bit more sense with those of a conspiracy mind. Whilst Punk was struggling to wrap his first tape around his white belt, Mickey Gall was running classes as a brown belt. That gulf is simply impassable. The way that I personally see it is that the UFC set Punk up to fail, making it look like on the surface that Punk was getting a less experienced opponent, but the reality is, anyone with a brain could see that Gall was leagues ahead, and Dana and his cronies were most certainly aware of this. It's my opinion that not only did they want to capitalize off of Punk in the first instance, they also wanted to make sure that he would have no marketability ever again going forward, use him, break him, and spit him out the other side, so that no organization would ever touch him again. I could be wrong on this, but if I am right, then this is the cutthroat and ruthless shit that Dana and Lorenzo love to talk about. It's only after irrevocably damaging Punk's brand with that embarrassing first loss that they then fed him Mike Jackson, you know, the guy that he should have fought all along. At least in that fight, Punk could have come out the other side with just a little bit more credibility. But alas, this is MMA, and MMA is cutthroat. It's been 7 years since Punk graced our television screens. The UFC has yet to conduct an experiment quite like the Punk one since, and the fact is, they haven't had to. Punk wormed his way into the organization when they needed him most, only to end up actually fighting when they needed him the least. This viral peak for the UFC has carried on essentially unabated until the last year or so. We seem to be in a lull of sorts. The stars have left once again, the greats of an era retired, and so call me a madman, but I feel it in my bones that this recent signing to the Paramount deal that we might indeed just be getting more stuff like the Punk experiment again in the UFC. I mean, at the time of making this video, they just cut Fakhretdinov because, well, he wins too much, and because he doesn't do it in an interesting or entertaining way, he's just chucked to the wayside. Whilst I actually don't care whether he got signed again or not, it does still point to a deeper truth, that the UFC really is after one thing: entertainment. With moves like this, it calls into question the validity of this sport, treading a fine line between the best entering the cage and those who just sell tickets. It's a dangerous line, and so in many ways, the fate of the sport hangs on a razor's edge. Phil Brooks, since leaving the UFC behind, has gone on to have quite the resurgence. First, without stepping into the cage again, Punk's MMA record improved. In July of 2021, it was reported that Mike Jackson had tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs, and by that, I mean weed. The dude blazed up and got busted by USADA right before his scheduled contest with CM Punk. This meant that the once unanimous decision win for Jackson was overturned to a no contest, meaning that officially, Punk retired from MMA having only ever lost one fight in his entire career. In August of 2021, he returned to the wrestling industry, signing with the AEW. His debut came at the Rampage event where he faced Darby Allin. Punk went on to rack up victories against wrestlers like Eddie Kingston and MJF. In May 2022, he won the AEW World Championship from Hangman Adam Page at Double or Nothing. An injury soon forced him out of action, and it was during this time that a backstage incident occurred involving Punk and the Elite. This led to suspensions and a split in the company. However, another backstage altercation with Jack Perry in August of 2023 resulted in his premature release from the AEW in September. Just 2 months after this, in November of 2023, Punk made a surprise return to the WWE at the Survivor Series in Chicago, his hometown. Much like his run in MMA, injuries would interrupt his run again, including a tricep tear after one of his great performances at the Royal Rumble. Now over the age of 40, with years of violence at his back, physical trauma, and pushing his body through unnatural amounts of punishment, it really seemed that Punk had ground his body down beyond repair. But if we have learnt anything about Punk throughout the course of this video, it is that the man simply never gives up, constantly marching in the face of adversity, outsized, outgunned athletically, and the perpetual underdog. Punk, if anything, is tough as shit. As of late December 2025, Punk remains the world heavyweight champion in the organization, and I think that says it all really. A story that has come full circle, and whilst many laughed at him, I don't think that we should ever fault him for trying. I want this video to be remembered for two things though. Firstly, that you should never hold yourself back from achieving anything. Don't be told you're too arrogant, too headstrong, too confident. People will always drag you down and hold you back. These are the same people who want nothing more than for you to lose, and will be the first to laugh at you when you fall. Instead, push ever further into the fray, as if no one else would or could. The second and final note to cap this video off with is to surround yourself with people who believe in you and want you to achieve the greatness that you're destined for. I have no doubt that when CM Punk walked into Roufusport in Wisconsin, that he wasn't laughed out of the building. Instead, he would have been told by a man who had turned many people's dreams into gold, that whilst what he was about to embark on would be fraught with challenge, it was indeed still not impossible, and that he believed in him.
Duke was an absolute legend when he was a kickboxer, and as a coach and as a man, and more importantly, as a father himself. He's leaving behind a young girl who loves him more than anything in the world, so we're thinking about the family first and foremost. And Duke he took guys in and became a father figure to so many of us. He was more than just a coach to me. He was more than just a coach to everybody that ever worked with him. I got to travel the world with that man, and he's gone way too soon, and we love you, Duke.